This week, Doug and I talk about secure coding practices. In the news, Alibaba's cloud security team discloses an Apache Spark REST API exploit. Comcast security flaws exposed partial addresses and social security numbers for 26 million customers. And how Facebook's plan to partner with banks raises privacy concerns. Stay tuned for all that and more on this episode of Application Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production. Layered Insight is the industry's first embedded security approach for containers. Trusted by Global 1000 enterprises to secure their containerized applications, it's the only solution that requires no root privileges, has zero dependency on the underlying infrastructure, and is fully portable across any container environment. Unify DevOps and SecOps, enabling the rapid development of containerized applications without worrying about security. To learn more, please visit layeredinsight.com/ASW. Rapid7 powers the practice of SecOps. Using shared data, analytics, and automated workflows, SecOps unites IT, DevOps, and security teams to make security an outcome of innovation. Rapid7 combines technology, expertise, and advocacy to drive vulnerability management, application security, incident detection, and log management for more than 7,000 organizations worldwide. Power up your SecOps practice with a free trial at rapid7.com/securityweekly. Hard-coded credentials can be trouble, but not as much trouble as a vulnerable DevOps environment. If you want protection without the hassle of security slowing you down, CyberArk, the #1 provider in privilege access security, has the solution for you. With CyberArk Conjure, developers can easily secure secrets across any DevOps toolchain or platform, whether your application runs in the cloud or on premises. Eliminate the headaches of managing secrets and try Conjure open source for free with no strings attached. Visit conjure.org/ASW to get started today.
Welcome, everyone, to episode 28, our 29th episode of Application Security Weekly. I am, of course, your host, Keith Hoodlet, and I'm excited to be joined by my clever co-host, Dr. Doug White. Doug, welcome to the show.
Hi, I get to be on Application Security Weekly. You don't. Well, Keith does, but the rest of you don't. So yeah, I'm really happy to be here because I love attention, and when I get to be on really cool shows like this, it's exciting.
Well, it's good to have you back. I know that we had you on, gosh, I feel like it was 20 plus episodes ago at this point, but Paul was out for something and he, pinch hit for him that day, and it was great. And so we're super glad to have you back, especially because in this case, we want to talk a little bit about, development and secure coding practices, which I know that as a professor at, let me guess, Salva Regina University, if I'm not mistaken. Is that it? Am I accurate on that?
No, you said the bad
Roger
S
Williams.
word. We don't say that word here. Look at my shirt. Yeah, it's
Roger Williams.
I know the mic's, but yeah, it's Roger Williams. It's okay. Roger Williams University.
So, as a professor that teaches development and programming to students, I wanted to make sure we talked a little bit about secure coding practices in general for our audience.
I like that.
Yep.
I think we should always talk about secure coding practices. It's really hard to talk about it because a lot of students and a lot of other people. It's one of those things that's just so all-inclusive and not inclusive that it's really challenging to find where do you inject. I mean, I know the academic answer is everywhere. It's always a part, but it's not. I mean, it's like trying to teach people neurosurgery while they're taking basic anatomy, and it's really challenging.
Speaking of neurosurgery and basic anatomy, by the way, a couple of quick announcements. So first, we do have a webcast with Endgame being held on August 16th, so that is later this week, from 3 to 4 p.m. on phishing prevention. So go to securityweekly.com/endgame to register. I don't think it'll be neurosurgery, but I know that phishing is a prevalent problem everywhere, and well, quite frankly, it's a good thing that we're covering it with such a talented group of folks over at Endgame. Also, again, not neurosurgery, but important, Thermo Fisher Scientific, my employer, is hiring. Specifically, I'm hiring. I'm actually looking for two openings right now. I have an application security engineer as well as a senior application security engineer. So if you go to wiki.securityweekly.com and click on episode 28, it is under the announcements section with links directly to apply. If you have questions, hit me up, hoodie@securityweekly.com. Happy to answer any questions you might have after looking at the job descriptions. So with that, secure coding. I feel like just before the show, Doug, we were talking, and you made up. You didn't make up, rather, but you brought up several good points, which is it's a little bit like trying to tell your students how to build a bridge when they don't necessarily know all of the physics that go into building a bridge. And so, development and secure coding practices. What are some of the problems that you see, at least especially with some of the students that you're teaching C++ and Python to? Is it the early students? Are you getting them as freshmen or sophomores? And what sort of challenges are they facing? Let alone facing security problems.
Well, there's a lot of different analogies for this. I mean, there really are. And sorry, I was applying for those jobs right now, but it's very, very frightening because one, you're in a language environment you don't understand. So it's like, okay, so take yourself and put yourself in a foreign country where they don't speak the language that you speak, and you don't speak the language they speak. So you're surrounded by this, and now you're being asked to order crepes at the French restaurant, and you don't know how to speak French, and they don't speak English. And so that's the first part of the problem. Is just like, how do I say strawberry in French? I want a strawberry in my crepe. Difficult. But now let's add to that there are people all around you who may want to throw something awful in your crepe while they're making it. And all you're really worried about is, I want a strawberry in my crepe. And all the people around you are like, I'm going to throw, refuse and dog poop and all these things into your food while it's being made. And the cook just wants to make the food. You just want to tell them what you want. And in the meantime, there are other people shouting all kinds of things and telling you how to say the wrong thing in French, and you end up in a giant mess. And that's really, really challenging because you've got students that are intimidated. I mean, programming is one of the classic things of intimidation. I mean, if you go to any school anywhere and you ask people what are the classes you don't want to take, it's calculus, it's biology, programming. I get that constantly from people saying, well, I wouldn't have to take a lot of programming in this. And you're like, what? Like, yes. And then they're like, okay, what else could I major in? And that's a scary business. And then once you add to that the idea that not only do you need to code it, do you figure out a way to put this on the screen and make it work, there are going to be people all around trying to damage that. That's problem one. The second part of the problem is most people. So remember, when we're dealing with freshman students or freshmen and grad school students, those are most people. They're not people that were just predestined to do this. Some of us have that kind of brain set from day one and trained up as engineers on the backside. But most people that are going into computer science engineering are people that like to solve problems. They're not people that like to think about how to unsolve the problem or how to break the problem. They're the people that want to solve the Rubik's Cube. Like when I got a Rubik's Cube, I was like, how can I take this apart and put it back together again so that it's solved? Instead of like, well, let me turn all these sides and spend 15 minutes figuring it out. I was just like, if I took all these cubes off and stuck them back on the right way, the thing is solved. Yay, I'm better than you. And that's the security side of the world. How do I get in the window? Whereas the most people say, I open the window. But the security people say, could I pick the lock? Could I break the glass? Could I go around and come in a door? And all of a sudden, it's a much more complex problem for freshman programming students who are already scared to death of that first programming class because they've heard all these horror stories. They don't know what they're going to do. And they're like, oh, no, I'm going to be dealing with a language I don't understand. And people are going to be trying to hurt me at the same time. So all that comes together to create this really, really scary problem of how do you teach people secure coding rather than just coding.
Absolutely. Right? And to that end, it's interesting because I remember when I was taking classes a few years ago in computer science, and it's funny that you mentioned there were people that were quote unquote, destined to do this. My degree's in psychology, right? Like yep. I just happened to love writing code and taught myself a lot of these things in my free time, and ultimately did go back and take classes for a couple of years at university. And what you point out was absolutely true. There was almost a point where you'd anticipate a cutoff, right? Whether it was freshman year or whether it was first semester of sophomore year, there was always one or two classes that were really almost built to weed out those students that really wanted to actually write code versus those that just kind of had a little bit of an interest in it.
I taught that class.
So right, I don't know if that's done on purpose or if that's done to make sure that those that pursue the craft further really do have the passion that they need to.
Well,
build software.
so let me tell you about that. So as a psych person, you'll get it. So to me, in the world, I've met people who are great programmers who came from all different strata. So, and the best programmers I ever encountered came from weird backgrounds because they thought outside the framework. They didn't always solve it the same way every time, because there are accounting type programmers. Sorry, accountants. There are accounting type programmers who fit really well into this corporate DevOps model of box 1, check, box 2, check, box 3, check. And they're very effective. But the problem is, if you get a person from a music background or a person from a psych background or just something totally different, like I used to empty the trash, now I'm coding the hell out of it. Those people do new and interesting and innovative things, which is really, really cool. The problem is, once again, you come back to this issue of how do we get through the DevOps? How do we get through the waterfall model? And as you get into more mature situations, what happens is those DevOps steps become these ironclad boxes that the real objective is no longer quality code. The real objective is getting that box signed off, because I've been stuck in those things many times. And I don't care about anything except getting that box checked. And if that box says X, Y, and Z, you do X, Y, and Z, and you check the box. Now, you really need to be thinking about Z prime and Q and that squiggly thing down there that's not even a letter. But you don't want to think about those, because if you introduce those into that part of the DevOps, you are doomed forever to being stuck in the DevOps loop. Because when you take that back to the person who signs it, they go, you did X, Y, and Z, and there's a squiggly thing here. No. You have to go back to step 1 to get the squiggly thing back into the model. And when you get into those modes, you have a lot of problems. So it's very difficult to say who gets sorted into and who gets sorted out. I'm a big fan of just bring them all in. I was always in the model of everybody in, not many out. And that meant that's the weed out thing you're talking about. I love the idea, get a room with 1,000 people in it and 30 of them become programmers. I think that's a good model. Schools, not so much fans of that anymore, because it makes universities really, really nervous, because we used to have the model of not everybody can do this. Now we have the model of everyone's capable. It's the instructor who's not doing a good job.
Yeah. So it's also the other problem, which is, graduation rates, right? Like if they continue to take the classes, but they fail the class, they can't really do the programming, but they're learning something. Yeah, it gets messy. And needless to say, what I started thinking about with a lot of the classes that I took is, first of all, in a university setting, you don't encounter a lot of the problems that you're going to ultimately encounter in the real world that lead to vulnerabilities. Mm-hmm. Good example is authentication and password management. Yep. I don't think, in the 2 years of classes that I took, I ever once had to write an application that had any form of authentication mechanism. Right? Like, it's almost, it's weird, right? It's almost as though universities teach to the whiteboard type application assessments that you might get when you're going and interviewing at, say, Google, right?
Yep.
But they don't ultimately teach you the useful skills that you need to do different things like input validation or output encoding, which, by the way, those two things aren't necessarily security related, right? Input validation is where a name field exists. You didn't put numbers, you put a name, right?
Here's another good example. When I was an undergraduate and I took computer science too, I had already been coding for a while, because I started coding when I was like 14. But when I took computer science 2, the first assignment was you had to steal the assignment from the instructor's folder on the system. And he said, if you get caught, you get an F. So now me being me, the first thing I did was go in and hack somebody's credentials on the system and use their credentials to steal the stuff out of the instructor's folders. So if I got caught, it's on them. And this was a very positive experience for everybody involved, because everybody there was in the game, and it was very common on those old mainframe systems. A lot of people were trying to hack things. People wrote malware, booby traps, all kinds of nasty stuff. I was telling that same story to somebody at a university maybe 10 years ago, and that person looked at me like I had just suggested that, we teach students using, like, if you get the question wrong, we blowtorch your feet. And they were like, that's the most unethical thing I've ever heard of in my life. And I was like, why? I mean, they were teaching us to be good at our jobs and to think through the problem and to think about how, and stuff like credential validation. I used strong passwords before anybody even knew what it was called because I did not want somebody in freshman engineering class hacking my account. So I made up really ridiculous passwords. Everybody else using passwords like 777. I was like making up these long passwords, and I actually was teaching myself how to do passphrasing and stuff with like weird switches so nobody could hack my account. And that was just stuff, and this was in the 80s. So people weren't really thinking like that, but they need to be. And today it's really tough. And you get that combination of what you were saying about retention funding, which means that states come in and go, everybody graduates. A lot of states have made that horrible mistake. They started saying, we're going to cut your funding if you don't graduate 100% of the students. That's a big mistake. That was not a university idea from way back when. That combined with this whole sort of, we can't teach people that would be bad. And all that starts getting right back into secure coding. It's like, how do you teach people pen testing? First time I ever taught pen testing, I was in a newspaper because people were going, professor's teaching hacking, needs to be fired. How outrageous. And it's like, we're just teaching people skills they need to know. And they're like, this is outrage, like teaching police officers to break into cars. I'm like, yeah, they do that actually. So the police,
right? That's actually something they do on a regular
exactly.
basis.
But I mean, I got all this pushback from like administration and faculty and all these people because it just turns into this giant miasma the minute security gets involved in it. And it's tough to teach because the minute you start, being the kind of DEF CON-y kind of, hey, hack this, all of a sudden you got students complaining because it's hard. And students complain to their parents and say, oh, that professor's making me break into something. And you're going to be getting a call from the university administration about a week later going, why are you teaching students to break into things? This is a threat to our entire environment and way of life. It must be stopped right now. Go back to the waterfall model.
You know what's hilarious is there are some schools, though, like on the flip side of it, right? So I always think back to like Carnegie Mellon University, Rochester Institute of Technology. There are probably a number of others that I'm not even thinking of right now, but those are the two that come to mind, that they specialize in teaching exploit development and, security in different formats. So well,
that's maturing now. So you're seeing that come around because people in the university realize we're a university. We're supposed to teach people. We're supposed to train them to think. We're supposed to train them to be better, not just give them a checklist and say, here, do these 5 steps and your code will be done and all will be well. Universities that are teaching people to think, that's what we need to be doing. And that was the whole idea of university since the ancient Greeks started it, was when you feel like you've learned enough to do the job, you can leave. I mean, that's how the Greeks did it. And, you get Plato to sign off on your philosophy and you can go out and find your own benefactor.
Right. So what is interesting about this entire conversation as well, especially because OWASP provides both the secure coding practices and a secure coding cheat sheet, which we've linked to in the show notes for any of our listeners on the development side, or heck, even on the application security side that want to make sure that their developers are following those things. One of the things that you find a lot of people discuss, and in fact, I think Wendy Nather and a few other folks were discussing it on Twitter just last week during Hacker Summer Camp, which is we need a how do they put it? Like a code of like a building code of standards or building standards type code for the way that development works. And I think that the short-sighted idea is, sure, that sounds wonderful, except that anyone can go and learn to code because all of that is readily available on the internet. And by the way, those things called boot camps are never going to teach you to follow like the building standards model of writing code, right? It's just, here's writing some code. So circling back on secure coding practices, it's interesting because it's almost a situation where you have to know the language well enough to actually then start encountering the problems that I think secure coding involves, such as, database security or system configuration, or even just data protection, right? Which is such a huge deal these days with GDPR. But the other side of it is, even for someone, like myself, where I know Java, C, C++, Bash, Python, a bit of JavaScript, I'm learning JavaScript in a bit more depth now, and I'm thinking to myself, there's a lot of things in JavaScript that I didn't know, and it just still seems weird to me as as someone that writes code. And then I haven't even started to touch on any of the security practices, right? So you have that other problem, which is things change so fast in the programming language, world, whether it's JavaScript, whether it's, Java-based or, JavaScript-based frameworks like React or Angular or even Vue.js, for example. They just change so fast that it's almost as though when you're teaching students about secure coding, you don't teach the exact practice of secure coding, you teach the idea, right? So input
Yeah.
validation is what should be coming in here, like whitelist the set of
Right.
characters that should be entering into this field that you are willing to accept. Output encoding, like how do you want it to actually be displayed back, and are you carefully, carefully thinking about what you're willing to accept as input?
And then remember, on every one of those steps too, there's not just the engineering solution. It's like the error trapping is part of engineering. It's like, well, I want a truck to go across the bridge. The bridge has to hold that much weight. So that's error trapping. But now start injecting things into it that nobody thought about. And one thing I've been talking about a lot to students is what I call distributed problems. And we see more now the use of pre-built components. So this is this is an API problem. So take something like Scratch, which is a teaching language that's object-oriented or whatever. Great tool to teach people how object-oriented programming works. The problem is a lot of the objects you're using were built by someone else. And we see that problem becoming more pronounced as we add cloud-based features where we can pull things in on the fly. We see pre-built engines like the Unreal Engine or some of those kind of things for gaming. And you say, I just want my game to work. I'm going to pull these characters in and this, and then mod it. So now it's not, we're getting even more distributed. So now it's not, so I'm going to use this. I'm going to take these pieces I got over here. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to grab these pieces off GitHub. I'm going to go grab these pieces out of this mod library I found and put those into my product as well. They're cool things. And then I noticed this first. I was fooling with this game called SimCity once that somebody sent me, and it was a really famous game. And it was really famous not just because it was a famous game, but it was famous because it was the first time I saw a game. I used to teach game programming a long time ago. It was the first game I saw where they invited the end users, the pathetic loser end users that you were working for out there in the world. Sorry, end users, but the coders were allowing these people to actually inject things into this game. And they were encouraging it. And the game turned into this giant miasma of weirdness. So it's like all this stuff. And it had every level of quality from like end user, developed, doesn't work, weird, causes the screen to flicker, to like these really sophisticated things that some 12-year-old kid put together in Hong Kong. And people were just slapping these things into their game and their system. And they didn't even think about it. And I'm like, wow, what could that cause? Is that game, I started looking at how is that game running on my system? Is it running as root? Yeah. Could you put a building mod in there that actually affects my system? And yeah. And I got really scared of that stuff. And we see that now in commercial development because people are starting to use that distributed modded world. And they say, here's a way to build an input module. It's already built. I'm just going to pull it in and use it. And maybe somebody then mods that in the back office, later, or GitHub, somebody, puts a new build in there and you don't even know it because all your builds are being updated without your knowledge. It's scary.
The funny thing is what you're describing is exactly the problem that we face with the world of JavaScript today with node modules. So Node Package Manager, pulls down all these different node modules and does exactly what you were describing. And the problem here is, first of all, most of the node modules that you pull down have dependencies on dependencies. And secondly, some of the modules that you're pulling down are built into the JavaScript language that you just don't know about because it's just easier to type npm install -- save, whatever, as opposed to like taking the 5 seconds to look at the JavaScript documentation and say, oh yeah, based on the way that the API works, like this is what I can call, and then I'm done. And so, yeah, more and more, I think that what we're finding is it's no longer the craft of software development or software engineering. It's the ability to, like Lego blocks, put things together in a formation that's required of you by your Scrum Master or your Jira ticket that you've been assigned or what have you.
And I have a name for this. I have a name for it. I call it gentuemia. So you have contracted gentuemia. And I'll tell you how I got it. We all know Gentoo. We all love Gentoo. But when Gentoo first came out, a friend of mine challenged me to get Gentoo running on his machine. And so I said, challenge accepted. What I learned by working with these like Linux and Gentoo type systems was Gentoo used to come and it had almost no drivers. It had almost no anything with it. It was a nightmare. And you found yourself in this just like slash and burn problem solving mode. You no longer think about anything other than, I will make this work. I will make this work. The video driver will work. It will. No, it will. I swear, it will work. It will work. And all of a sudden, you're just downloading all kinds of stuff and building it and downloading it and building it and downloading and building it. And you don't even know after a little while. Like, at first, you take notes. You're writing them down. And you're going, added build 10579 of this driver. And you're really nice and engineering about it. By 12 hours later, when you've had 96 cups of coffee and now you're pouring whiskey in the coffee and vodka in the Red Bull or whatever works for you, you're just like, all the notes are in the floor under the empty pizza boxes, and you're going, work, 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 damn you, work, work, work. And then all of a sudden it works, and you go, done, I'm out. And I have no idea what I just did or what I pulled in there or what builds are in there or what I added or took away. And that I call gentuemia. And you have the same problem in programming. Now you have all these things available to you in this giant miasma of the world, whether it's in the cloud or it's in GitHub or wherever it is, and you start pulling things in because you want it to work. And in hour 12, it's like, that'll work. That right there will work. I'm going to use it. I don't know what it does, and all the instructions are in Ukrainian, but I'm going to use it because it works.
The funny thing is about that as well is then you hand it to ops and you have to run it in production. and then, it's not well documented. It wasn't communicated to ops, exactly how it's supposed to work other than the command that gets it started. And then security comes in and says, we've done an audit of your code and you have these problems. And they say, yeah, it's going to take us 12 weeks to fix it. And we don't have 12 weeks because we're on our next sprint.
and you're sort of sitting there adding all these things that a lot of people don't have, like security and ops. A lot of people are just like, done, build, it runs. Okay, release it. And, security is the same guy. So security's like, I don't know how all my notes are, but I don't have time. And I've been awake for 36 hours. But security, yeah, it's okay. We got it. It'll be fine. And, right. Really, the small to medium enterprise, you see that all the time where either they don't even have it or they don't even have a DevOps model. All they have is a coding team who have been up for 4 straight days trying to get this to work because marketing promised we would have a release on Friday. And, there's 8 million people waiting on the release, and everybody's going, is it done? Is it done? Is it done? And you're going, it's done. And they're like, did you check the security? Yeah, I did, I guess. I hope.
Or like it gets the security, and it's security. Why are you holding us up? Why are you keeping this from going to production? And it's like, why didn't you give this to me 2 weeks ago? Absolutely.
and you're absolutely right. I've been in that very same situation with clients where you're sitting there and you're being the security as a consultant and saying, this is not, I have no idea what you did here. There are calls going every which way on the earth. I don't know what these libraries are. Where did they come from? How did you validate them? Who wrote them? And they're going, marketing is calling down there, and the VP of marketing is going, Doug, come on now. Why are you holding us up? And yeah, my answer is, well, I needed this about 6 months ago, and I could evaluate it, and it's not going to happen tonight. And they're like, override. Yeah, I'll sign off on it. I just get the marketing VP to sign it. Then you can say, I was never there. I don't know. It happened after I fell asleep.
It's funny because under the general coding practices, under the OWASP secure coding practices list, one of their checkboxes says specifically, use tested and approved managed code rather than creating new unmanaged code for common tasks, right? So here's a situation where it's like, cool, maybe if your security person had an idea as to what you were trying to develop, it can go out and like pre-approve these things. You would be facing a lot less problems when it comes back to, okay, now it's got to go through security review. Well, it's using 12 of the 14 libraries that you've approved. You only have to look at 2 libraries, and it's really easy comparatively. So it's funny. We've been mentioning DevOps a little bit throughout this conversation. And one of the funny things that DevOps really is it's a process more than anything, but it's at the heart of it, it's communication. It teaches people that, hey, guess what? If you communicate often and early enough, you can actually solve all your problems. If dev actually talks to ops and says, by the way, this is how we're building it, this is on our roadmap, and this is when we're releasing it by, and this is the infrastructure it needs to live on, and ops knows that, they can go and build it. If security knows these are the libraries that you're using or that you want to use, we can go find the right things to get the job done. Maybe it's not the exact library you thought of. As just, a good general practice is communicate. It's not even code anymore. It's talk to the people on the other sides of the fence or fences, and break down those walls.
And hope you can even speak the same language. I mean, I had a client not too long ago who was asking me about why can we not get anybody for this job. It was a security ops review. And, you look at what that person needs to know, and there's a huge list here on OWASP of all these items. And just that is years and years of experience to be able to understand database. What kind of database? Is it Oracle? Is it something else? Understanding error handling, crypto, all these things. And then I was like, well, what are you paying? And the company's like, oh, we're paying up to $45,000 depending on the level of experience.
Yeah, right?
And I was like, well, I heard there's some people looking for a move up from like maintenance who, that guy that changes the light bulbs was looking for a job, and maybe you can get them. And they're not getting anybody because they wouldn't pay, but they've got a job description that sounds like you almost need to be like, 30 years of experience with all these different systems. And it's really challenging for that security ops person to even be able to ask the right questions. First time I ever saw a security ops person at all was as a result of an audit. I went and talked to a person, his background was in accounting. No offense again, accountants. He was a really good accountant. He was a really good auditor. Didn't know a thing about systems, but he'd been tasked with being the security ops person. He didn't even know what a database really was. He knew the idea of a database, but he had no idea how it worked. He didn't know the names of any big ones, and he's supposed to somehow evaluate, do these punches into the database, are these things valid? Are they going to cause problems? Are they holes? And he didn't know what to ask. That was why he had me. He's like, you need to tell me what, I was writing questions for him while he was doing his meetings, because it's like I'm like, what database is it? Because he didn't know. And then they're like, it's Oracle. And I'm like, okay, so, how have you secured that? Or have you followed all these criteria? And it's nuts.
And so, I mean, just to circle back on it in a whole kind of maybe lessons learned from today's, first segment of the podcast is, if you're a developer and you want to get into security, there are a lot of people out there, myself included, who are happy to, point you in the right direction.
Yeah.
And it's going to make you incredibly valuable. Likewise, if you're a security professional and you want to go learn how to code, you are going to 10x your value inside of your organization, and probably not 10x your salary, but you're certainly going to be able to make more as a result of it than just being a security person that doesn't know anything about, databases or input validation, right? If you know those things, you are already more valuable than many of your peers in the industry.
Well,
at that
even
point.
if you're just like what do they call it in DevOps, like a T? There's like 3 different kinds of people. So there's like I's.
Yeah,
there's
those that are slightly like it's they have a little bit of visibility across, and then they have a very deep.
They have one deep
area.
dive. So that's a T, is somebody that's got a broad background, but they got one deep dive expertise. Just become that person, and you'll really make out a lot of money on that. I mean, if you can become the last one, which I can't remember what the one is.
I think it's an EU.
Which
is you have like 3 levels of expertise.
Yeah.
But one's like really deep, one's slightly moderate, and one's
I mean,
up at the top.
The one on the right side of that grid, whatever it is like, that's the I've got multiple levels of expertise and a lot of broad background. That's your people that have been in this field for a long time. But if you can just be a T, you're going to really be impressive. So be a T at least.
All right. So with that, remember, be a T.
Be a T.
We are going to take a short break and come back for the news.